These are the worst Paradox Pokemon to be released within Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and what better to start off this list than Iron Jugulis, probably one of the most forgotten Pokemon within Generation 9, and might I say rightfully so. Iron Jugulis, if it wasn't evident already, is the future form of Hydreigon, the pseudo-legendary of Generation 5. Hydreigon is a pretty powerful Pokemon, and outright hard to take down prior to Generation 6 introduction of the Fairy type. Regardless, its future form however doesn't live up to any of its standards, and not even close. Iron Jugulis has an interesting typing of Dark and Flying, which I guess isn't all that bad of a typing, but also doesn't stand out offensively nor defensively. With Dark, you do get Dark Pulse, which is a pretty standard move for most special Dark type users, but Flying here offensively is a bit tricky, because you're either relying on Air Slash, which is low on power and has a chance to miss, or Hurricane, which is a high power move, and its base 70 accuracy means it's probably not reliable to use. So it does have a rough time over there. However, other than that, it's actually got a really decent move pool that's very sizable and impressive for the most part. That cannot be said though about its base stats, and boy do we have a real problem here. For one, it's 30 BST lower than Hydreigon, the present day form, which already means its stats across the board will be compromised somewhere, but little do we know it's basically compromised everything except speed. 108 speed in Generation 9 is not cutting it, especially for a Pokemon that on paper seems designed to be more offensively imposing. Now, although it is faster than its present day form, the issue is it's also weaker, both offensively and defensively, which really hurts this Pokemon. 122 in special attack I guess isn't too bad, but it's magnified even further when you realize the defensive stats are also severely compromised. Dark and Flying comes to bite back here, as while it's not horribly defensively, it also isn't the greatest, and it's weak to a lot of common things. Weaker offensively and defensively, that's already a really bad start, and then you combine that with its Quark Drive ability and things start to spiral out of control. Now, Quark Drive is the same ability as Photosynthesis, except in one fact it relies on electric terrain over Sun, and it's pretty well known that obviously Sun has had much more of the upper hand in the metagame. But because Iron Jugulis isn't great offensively, although 122 is great but not top tier in Generation 9, it has to rely on booster energy to get some form of offensive boost to get going, especially since Game Freak didn't even give this thing Nasty Plot, which actually may have changed things for the better of it. Either way, Iron Jugulis has mightily struggled, and if it's going to be in Generation 10, I hope one, Pokemon changes a couple things for it so it can be better just overall as a Pokemon offensively in competitive battling, and hopefully they actually improve this design where it's just not a straight robot copy pasta kind of design from Hydreigon in present day form. Next one up is Brute Bonnet, the past Paradox form of Amoonguss. Amoonguss is most notable for being a reputable stalwart with his Regenerator and Grass and Poison typing. Although Generation 9 isn't the best showcasing of it, it's been usually common metagame staple prior, and in VGC it is very well known obviously. Bonnet on the other hand is more of an offensive version, which makes sense from a theoretical standpoint. Fighting those dinosaurs back in the day definitely was not much easier. Being more offensively was an interesting take on Bonnet, but as you see on these stats, it's ridiculously slow, but that comes with having a higher defensive stat profile distribution thanks to its overall higher BST than Amoonguss. Notable moves such as Seed Bomb, Close Combat, Spore, Sucker Punch, etc. are all decent moves to really run on this thing. On paper, Brute Bonnet seems very interesting, and perhaps theoretically more viable than it sounds like because of these reasons I listed above, combined with the fact it's a past Paradox form, meaning it will have boatload of chances to abuse Sun teams and its photosynthesis ability quite often than not more than those future forms. This all stops though once we mention its Grass and Dark typing, a typing Game Freak repeatedly gives to the wrong Pokemon, and this is of no exception. Like I detailed in my other video where I was discussing the most disappointing Pokemon in Generation 9, Wilchin really struggles because his poor defensive typing is what doesn't allow it to excel in its role. The exception was Meowscarada because it has Protean and really good moves and stat distribution to really make up for this small tweak in its arsenal. Brute Bonnet, while yes it's not a defensive Pokemon, or at least not in its role, again its poor typing and horrendous speed makes it very easy to pick off in singles gameplay. And the weird part is Game Freak perfectly distributed stats, so booster energy cannot activate its speed by 1 base point. Talk about by making it even worse, and on top of this, the only set up move that it does have is Growth. Like no Source Dance or anything else, just Growth, which isn't saying much, and raw Sucker Punch power, while sure it's coming off a pretty high stacking stat, isn't enough to compete with its peers in a higher competitive gameplay scene. A sad yet terrible reality for this mushroom monster, and thus it's no wonder why this thing has been struggling to be even making a competitive or like a mainstay consistent name for itself in the higher tiers of competitive play. Probably the one that hurts the most though on this list has to be Slither Wing. Slither Wing has one of the coolest Paradox designs to date in my personal opinion. They went from a simple sun moth Pokemon to a dinosaur-like creature that walks around. I think that's really cool. Anyways though, Slither Wing, unlike his present day form, boasts a higher BST FI70 and is a physical attacker with the typing of bug and fighting. Pokemon decided as well to take a different approach to this moth monster and made it a bit more slower and bulkier Pokemon to take down, like a similar approach to I guess what they did with Iron Hands, although probably not to that extreme. Anyways though, for the most part on paper, it does look pretty decent to do that and has a solid move pool to back it up. But upon closer inspection, the problems become outright clear. One, its speed stat probably stood out to most of you guys off rip, as it did to me initially. 81 is such an odd speed stat. It's not too fast and not too slow. Plus, why the 1? Like, what are we doing here? I feel like for this Pokemon specifically, they should have committed to either or, but by leaving it basically at this speed stat here, it's hard to commit consistent investment in its speed stat because it's just in an awkward state. This stat feels really wasted, and because it's not generally faster than most excellent offensive Pokemon, we should at least accept some form of priority other than first impression. But it is what it is, and there's nothing we can really do about it. Regardless though, this is where its alright typing really comes into play. Now, bug and fighting is a really cool typing, and as noted with Buzzwole in the past, but because its stat distribution is sort of messy, its subpar typing is starting to be more glaring and noticeable. The only really good resists are like Dark and Ground, and its weaknesses are pretty common weaknesses, and other than that, it takes a lot of neutral damage from a lot of common Pokemon and types, which doesn't bode well for this middling speed Pokemon. Slither Wing as well has no relevant boosting moves other than Bulk Up, which is fine I suppose, but if you want to be a downhill sweeper or actually take control of your awkward speed stat, it does quite literally nothing. Now, booster energy is an option that requires you to basically have zero investment in its attacking stat, which again, being an offensive Pokemon with already middling speed, the last thing you want to do is compromise your greatest strength to that degree. At least with Iron Moth, Game Freak took what was Volcarona and just made it more offensively imposing with its stats that are more making sense as well. Now, Iron Moth has its separate issues, but the core aspect of it was largely kept the same, which is the aspect or structure that helped Volcarona succeed in every generation it's been in. Slither Wing was changed up entirely, and it's changed up with its weird speed stat, no really good priority moves, alright typing, and lacking boosting moves that are all not tools to put in a great position. Slither Wing seems like a great Pokemon and has been great in moments, but not in a consistent fashion, which reflects on its current tiering and why it takes so much to build around and set up for its successes in the long run in the singles metagame when using it. Speaking of setting up though, this video would not be complete without talking about Screamtail, the most utility driven Pokemon we've probably seen in a very long time, if at all ever. Quite literally not meant for offenses as told through its horrendous attack and special attacking stats. It's only really good in setting up screens or wish encore techniques, etc. It's very limited on the offense and quite non-existent. That's what pretty much comes down to Screamtail, as well as again with another lackluster typing. Now, Fairy is a good type, but Psychic does nothing to complement defensively, and as you can see on the screen, this typing doesn't do much at all either. Neutral to most types, weak to strong types in the game, and offer resistances to basically nothing except for maybe Dragon, but even that is pretty easy to work around. No offensive game and struggling defensive profile, that's just not a combo for success. I am aware it is rather bulky to take down, but if it doesn't have a reliable cast, it's just useless as the more Pokemon you take down beside it. It's just easier to pick off. Its utility and stats are great, but you can find many of these more Pokemon that are actually much more imposing all around. For example, Glowking and Clefable. These are utility and defensive Pokemon that serve the same similar role as like Screamtail is trying to do, that have offensive games and are much more better and more significant in value in defensive profile and all around than Screamtail with its good move pool, typing, abilities, stats, etc. You get the gist. It's just outclassed all around, offensively and defensively, and no real reason to use it over other higher profile utility Pokemon. But probably hands down the worst Paradox Pokemon to be released is Iron Thorn, which fortunately for you guys, I made a video recently detailing how bad it is alongside other disappointing Pokemon released in Scarlet and Violet, so be sure to check that out if you haven't already. But before you guys go, be sure to comment down below what you guys think about this video and any more disappointing Pokemon you have in terms of Paradox Pokemon, and be sure to join the Chompy Discord. And with that, thanks for watching as always.